In 3ds Max, a maximum of two spline vertices can be welded together at one time. For curves used in paths, which is something we'll be looking at in a moment, this makes a lot of sense. If you could weld more than two vertices together, then this would mean that your spline effectively could branch, and this would cause a mess for basically most of the tools that actually use splines. So it's basically not allowed in 3ds Max. I can actually show you that by, let me just get these vertices here and break them. I'll just break that. I'll grab this segment here and grab it, pull it over here. I'll put it in the same spot as this vertex here. And if I get these vertices, we've got three vertices on this point, and I can choose a very large threshold. You can see this is, extremely large. This should basically weld anything. And if I click on weld, you'll see that nothing happened there. And if I go in here, click here, you can see that this vertex is still independent. So it simply will not weld together three vertices in a spline. It's also important to bear in mind that a 3ds Max spline can have multiple segments, and all of these segments don't actually need to connect to each other to actually form a valid spline. If you created a spline like this, it wouldn't be of much use, but all the same, it is actually possible, and it can be used as a perfectly valid shape in a number of the spline tools. However, generally, you won't actually be doing that. And what I mean by that is, if we go back into subobject mode, click on vertices, and say break, and now if I go and grab these segments and move these apart, all of these segments are completely independent now, and that means we can actually completely fracture what we have here off into pieces. But generally you'll find that when you're creating splines, this isn't something that you'll do, but it is actually possible, as you can see. So I've just completely broken that apart there, and it's still a perfectly valid spline object. There's no problem with that. But we do have three main, not really objects or shapes, but definitions of or uses of splines in 3ds Max. So let me just give you an example of three of these now, and it'll actually make more sense. And these are the sort of things that you'll use in the tools that we'll be looking at later on in this DVD. So the first of those sort of basic concepts is a line. And a line is simply what I would say is it's just a connection of segments which all connect together. So I think that makes perfect sense to you. And if, it could be linear, you can have linear segments, or you could have curves. It really doesn't matter. It's still basically a line. I could select all of these vertices, right click, and then say smooth. And that's actually set all of those control points to produce a smooth curve. If I wanted to, I could go in here and I could right click and I can say change those segments to being linear. It doesn't really matter. This is a line, and these are all just different variations on that definition. So a line is a single unbroken set of segments which all connect together, but which don't actually connect together back at the start and the end to form a closed loop. That's actually something else. So let's move on to the next definition now, and that is a path. And we generally refer to a path as being a line. It's basically the same thing. They can basically be used interchangeably as descriptions. And paths are often used as, well, the path along which other splines can be moved to form the basis of a parametric surface. Also, they can be used as a path along which a node can move over time, and in other words, this makes the object animate. So paths are basically made up of lines, and or sometimes a path can actually be made out of a shape, and a shape is actually a closed collection of segments. So it depends on the situation that you're talking about. So as an example, this line that we've drawn here is a perfectly valid path. We could also draw a circle. That would be a path, and as an example, we could move something along this to create a shape, or we could animate something along this, and it would just basically move along, in a circle. An n-gon is a valid path. A helix is certainly a valid path. Text isn't a valid path because it's a very complex shape, and if you animated something along this, it would only probably actually move along the M. So it doesn't really make that much sense as a path. An arc is a path. A donut wouldn't really be a path because you can see it's made up of two splines. So I think you can kind of get the idea of what I mean by a path now. It's a single unbroken collection of segments, and it can either form a line like you can see here, or it can form a closed shape as you can see here with the end gone and also the circle. And the last concept is of a shape, and basically a shape can be any combination of closed or open splines. This is a very loose term, but when we're talking about shapes, we generally mean any spline that is not suitable for use as a path. Generally, though, splines are closed shapes that will go on to form a surface when they're used in combination with one of the spline tools. So a good example of a shape would be, it could actually be this line if you wanted it to be, but more often you'll find that shapes are things like n-gons, or the text that you can see here, or these circles, or for instance, this donut shape that we made here. They tend to be closed splines, and also shapes tend to be complex in makeup. So for instance, this text here is a good example of a shape, but really it's very freeform. But you'll very often find that when you're modeling, you'll be defining a shape with most of the tools. With the loft tool, for instance, you'll be defining a path. So you'll define a path, something like this, and you'll combine that with a number of shapes, such as these, to create a 3D surface. So these are rough kind of concepts, but it might make a bit more sense when I start referring to, let's create some shapes or let's create a path, what I'm actually talking about later on in this DVD. So yeah, the name shape is just a label. It shows that we're intending to use that particular spline for a particular purpose. It's perfectly reasonable to use a closed spline as a path, with the limitation that there's only one closed shape within that spline. If you think about it, if you have 3 circles with a spline and you use it as an animation path, which circle should you use? So generally, when you're talking about a path, you're talking about a single spline, a single line which is made of multiple segments. When you're talking about a shape, very often it's a closed collection of segments. Very often it's complex. But these are just labels that I'll be using to describe certain splines, and it just shows you what they're actually intended for. So before I finish off here, let me just quickly run through the templates that you can see over here. These allow you to very quickly create different kinds of splines for different circumstances. And I'm just going to run through these very quickly. You can actually experiment with these yourself. The first option is line. That allows us to draw basically a line, a curve, which is made up of multiple segments. And you can see that we've got an option here for the initial type of smoothing. And as an example, you can either have curved or smooth. So let's say we'll have it as smooth. So now if I click like this, you can see that it's got smooth interpolation on each vertex that we created here. I can just delete this again. And if I choose corner, you can see that we have linear segments produced. And also we can change it so that if we wanted to, we can say, let's go for corner. In other words, we want linear segments, but if we drag as we're creating, we can then change it to a different type here. So very often this is the best kind of combination I find is corner and Bezier. So now I can go like this if I want linear, and if I don't want linear, I can just hold on the mouse button and drag like this, as you can see. So you can just define the curve as you go along just by dragging. But if you don't drag, you just get a linear segment. So you can see you can very easily draw out some pretty cool shapes just using that tool very quickly. Then the next option is the circle, and I don't really think that needs much explanation. You can say, there we are, there's a circle, and there's the radius. You can change the radius after the fact. And then we have an arc, and this obviously allows you to create part of a circle. So you basically define the start point the end point, and then the curvature between those 2 points, as you can see. And once you've created it, you can also change various parameters and redefine the arc in that way. So you can change things there, as you can see. And you can also create a pie slice. That's pretty cool. Then we have the n-gon. So this is basically a closed spline shape of any number of sides, as you can see here. You can change the radius, how the radius is worked out based on whether it's inscribed or circumscribed using either of these values. You can just basically choose whichever makes the most sense for you. And then you can see you can choose how many sides. And there we are. We start off a triangle, square, pentagon, hexagon, septagon, octagon, and so on. And you can also choose a corner radius, and that actually puts in more control vertices here and here, and basically bevels the corner. So you can see now, instead of having a sharp corner here, we've got actually a nice curved corner to the n-gon. And if I right click and say convert to editable spline, go in, you can see there are these extra control points with these curved sections in between. Then we have the text object, and this is a fantastic little tool. You can type in any kind of text that you want here. I can just type in some text. As you can see, you can choose the font, whatever font it is that you fancy, and then it automatically creates the spline shape for you. And you can choose the size here. You can choose whether it's italicized, underlined, what the if it's aligned left, center, right, justified, and so on. And you can also change the kerning. You can basically change the inter-character spacing, and you can also change the inter-line spacing by changing the leading. So just put in rules there, and therefore, there we go. I can center it, and then also I can change the leading. I can bring that together. So very, very easy to actually create text in 3ds Max. Very fast and easy to use tool. A real boon for anybody creating any kind of logos. Then we have the section, and this is actually quite groovy. Probably the best thing I can do to actually show you how this works is to create a torus. So let me just create a torus here. And now if I go into splines and then choose section, it'll actually create a section based on the current object that I have selected. And you can see this yellow line that goes around here. Well, that's actually the section. And as I rotate this plane around, you can see that it's basically cutting a plane through this torus. And at that point of intersection, it's actually creating this yellow line. And that's actually a spline if we want it to be. So I'll just make it a little bit more sort of better quality. I'll increase the quality of this torus. And let's just increase this here. And now, as you can see, there's a yellow line. And you can see it seems to have kept the segmentation from when we first created the cross section. So let's just get rid of that and create another cross section. There we are. Just rotate that. As you can see, there you are. So it's using the segmentation we've just produced. It's actually very unusual in Max because pretty much everything is usually procedural, so you can just change things on the fly. But let's say we like that shape. We can just go into the object here and say create shape. And then we could rotate it around to here, let's say. And you can say create that shape. And let's get a cross section over here. Create that shape. And now, get rid of the torus. You can see there we have these cross sections in 3D space. So a really cool tool that allows you to, create some pretty complex splines. Let's actually have a look at how these are made up here. Convert to editable spline, go in. You can see it's actually made up of multiple segments there. And they're all linear by the looks of it. So quite interesting way there to actually create some splines if you need to. Then we have the rectangle. I don't really think that needs much explanation. There we go. Again, we can put some beveling on it, which is really cool. We have the ellipse. Let me just draw this out here. So if you need to create any kind of ovoid, any kind of ellipse, then you can just do that with that tool. The donut is really the sort of two-dimensional representation of a torus. So you have an outer circle and an inner circle, an outer radius and an inner radius. So you can actually create two circles in that way, and that could be used to create a number of different objects depending on, how it's used. Then we have kind of in a way a partner to the n-gon. We've got the star. The difference between it and the n-gon is that it has two radii. So if I just draw this out here, you can see that this star has 6 points, and you can see that the outer radius at the moment is 32, so we can change that, and we can change the inner radius. Obviously, if we make them very similar, it starts to appear to be an n-gon. But obviously, when the two are quite different from each other, it actually looks like a star. And also, you can see that we can round the corners again, both the outer ones and the inner ones, as you can see. So you can create quite interesting looking shapes there. And also, we can add some distortion by using this value here. And as you can see, that actually twists the basically the vertices of the inner radius get twisted around the center point. So it's actually really cool, the kind of shapes that you can create with that star there. And this is very characteristic of all the kind of spline tools in 3ds Max. All of these are very easy, fast, easy to use, and also very flexible. And we'll finish off with a helix. This is great because it allows you to create basically screw threads. You can define the radius, and then basically you have a radius at the bottom, a radius at the top, and then you have a number of rotations that actually achieves those two radii. So basically, as you can see at the moment, I've gone for a radii of 18 at the base and 0 at the top. Let's just change that so they're both equal. And then you've got a height value, as you can see, the height of it. And then you've got the number of turns. So in this case, we've got just one turn. But obviously, for a proper screw thread, we probably want to have multiple turns. So if we combine this helix with, if we use this as a path and we create some shapes and basically loft them along here, we can actually create some really cool screw threads. And we can choose whether it rotates around in a clockwise manner or in a counterclockwise manner. And that's it for the templates, and that's it for this chapter. So let's move on now into the next chapter, where we're going to look at vertices and interpolation. And that's very important because up until now we know that we have vertices, and we know that between two vertices we have a segment. But what is it that actually makes that segment curved? I mean, basically it should just be a straight line. Well, for that segment to become a curve, it has to be interpolated in some way. So let's have a look at that particular topic in the next chapter.